Hello. Hello. Let me get some water. All right. Let me post on X and Blue Sky that I'm live. We're going to be doing a book reading, ladies and gentlemen, and I'll be playing Armored Core 6. I'll be picking that back up. I'm so happy to get off 3 hours early. For a book reading of Speak. Nicaragua. And history from... Alright, bam. So let's post a Blue Sky here. How are you guys today? How are you guys doing? Alright, posting. So, alright. So yesterday I did a news stream. It was about 30 minutes long. You can look it up on my YouTube channel. Talk trash on some celebrities. Talked about Israel, Palestine, and the police. We're all about defunding the police here, abolishing the police. All right, so boom. So here's what I want to do. How's my stupid microphone working today? I got this boom arm mic. I've never been able to figure it out. So this is part 3 of... I've been reading 2 different books. Sandinista Speak. It's about United States in the West and imperialism in Nicaragua. And I've been reading 50 Key Video Games. I think I've talked about 6 games here from the early 70s up to the early mid 80s. So we're going to pick up on like Super Mario Bros. Like the mid 80s and on. I'll read a few games from there. Let me see. But so what have we learned? Let's start with Sandinista Speak, guys. If you guys are new here, I'm Game.Film. I like not just streaming video games, reviewing films, but I also like to talk about imperialism. I live in the United States, and we are an empire. We've got 1,000 military bases over the world. We have 3 branches of secret police. The CIA is always plotting to overthrow countries that don't let the mega transnational corporations move in and carve up the country the way they want. So that's one of my passions, guys. And this is a pretty eye-opening book. I've been struggling to pick a book lately, but I settled on this one because it's a real eye-opener, guys. So we're going to start off on page 23. This is part 3 of Sandinista Speak. And what have we learned so far, guys? The intro in the first chapter. The Sandinistas overthrew the U.S.-backed dictator Anastasio Somoza, but the Somozan family had been in charge for 50 years or so, and they made the country absolutely destitute. They let the corporations come in and carve up the country and left the people extremely poor, unable to fight back. They were ill. Infantile rate was every rate you can possibly think of was horrific, guys. But props to the Sandinistas. Salute. They kicked the shit out of the National Guard and took it to the U.S. empire, man. So you got to respect these guys. And I mean, I'm sure nobody's perfect. I'm sure their group has problems here and there. But when you fight back against imperialism, guys, props to you. And this first chapter was the kind of like their constitution, how they want free education, they want literacy programs, etc., etc. They want to give land back to the peasants, etc. But now on page 23, chapter 2, or this is part 3. This is titled, dude, my book's falling apart too. Look, it's like, it's falling apart. This is titled Nicaragua 0 Hour by Carlos Fonseca Amador. And it starts off in italics. I think it's giving us a little history from the editor. Carlos Fonseca Amador was the central leader of the FSLN from the time he helped found it in July 1961 until his murder by the Somoza dictatorship on November 8, 1976. As a student, Fonseca had joined the pro-Moscow Nicaraguan Socialist Party, with which he later came into political conflict. First arrested for his revolutionary activities in 1954, Fonseca was repeatedly detained. In 1969, after an escape from a Costa Rican jail, he went to Cuba, where he published this article he had written earlier in the year. It first appeared in the Spanish-language edition of Tricontinental, number 14, 1969. This translation by Michael Taber and Will Reisner is based on a 1979 reprinting of the article by the National Secretariat of Propaganda and Political Education of the FSLN. So, there was the little intro. Now, the economic situation is the first bullet point. The people of Nicaragua have been suffering under the yoke of a reactionary clique imposed by Yankee imperialism virtually since 1932, the year in which Anastasio Somoza G. was named Commander-in-Chief of the so-called National Guard, GN, a post that had previously been filled by Yankee officials. This clique has reduced Nicaragua to the status of a neo-colony, exploited by the Yankee monopolies and the local capitalist class. Pause 1 second. So, guys, old school empires, they would just put one of their own in there and reign supreme, right? But neo-colony or neoliberalism, as we call it, the empire installs someone from that country, as in this case, Somoza. So it's not like some white guy in there, but he's a puppet president and he does what he's told. He's like, hey guys, come on in. You can carve up whatever you want. Just leave my friends and I, my closest friends' family, the elites, the ultra 1%. Take care of us, man. You can have whatever you want. So it appears there's a democracy, but there is none. So that's what the U.S. and the CIA does, guys. Okay, let's get back to it. At the present time, the economic crisis that the country has been suffering has gotten worse. In the years immediately preceding 1966, the national economy grew at an annual rate of 8%. By contrast, in the years 1966 and 67, the growth rate declined to 3.1 and 4.6% respectively. The production of cotton, which has been increasing since 1950, will also increase only slightly in the future. This is due, on the one hand, to a saturation of the foreign capitalist market supplied by national production. And, in addition, it is due to the growing competition from synthetic fibers. There has, in fact, been a major drop in the prices offered by the foreign capitalist market for the harvest from the 1968 planting. This last fact has persuaded the country's government to establish commercial relations with some socialist countries, which will take part of the cotton harvest. This crop amounts to 26% of the cultivated land in Nicaragua. Regarding coffee, which is the second largest export product, there is already overproduction, which cannot be sold on the capitalist market. Regarding sugar production, Official sources state that it is unlikely that the pace of growth can be maintained in the immediate future. The exploitation of minerals such as gold and copper, which is directly in the hands of foreign investors, pays ridiculously small sums to the national treasury through taxes. Parallel with this, the handing over of the national riches to the Yankee monopolies has continued to increase. In 1967, for example, a law went into effect that gave Magnavox, a company specializing in the exploitation of forests, absolute ownership of 1,000,000 hectares of national territory. Magnavox? What? I thought they made electronics, guys. Got to look farther into that. At the same time, the ruling clique handles the funds of the state banks as if they were personal funds, while fraud and smuggling reach staggering dimensions. The Somoza family, which had very limited... my phone rang. Shit, I just ripped my book. Whoops. Where were we? Let's start over. At the same time, the ruling clique handles the funds of the state banks as if they were personal funds, while fraud and smuggling reach staggering dimensions. The Somoza family, which had very limited economic resources when it took power, has obtained a vast fiefdom, whose domains go beyond Nicaragua's borders and extend into other countries of Central America. In Nicaragua, moreover, there is an unjust distribution of land. Statistical reports for the year 1952 show that a few proprietors control 55% of the total area of privately owned farms. Nicaragua offers exceptional conditions for the development of cattle raising. Nevertheless, the consumption of products derived from cattle has declined, and the increase in exports has largely been due to foreign sales of cows that would have contributed to an increase in the quantity of animals. The advantages provided to producers of products for foreign markets, in this case for growing cotton, has led to a situation where food products are grown on the worst lands, which also means that imports are needed to satisfy this important sector. Nicaragua is among the countries that have been hurt most by the so-called Central American economic integration. It is well known that this integration has been simply a plan to increase the economic hold of the Yankee monopolies over Central America. This scandalous fact has reached such a magnitude that even spokesmen of the Nicaraguan regime itself have been put in the situation of publicly stating that the industries established as a result of this integration do not enhance national economic development. As with the other countries of Central America, there is no oil production in Nicaragua. It has been stated, however, that if there were possibilities for oil exploitation in Central America, the Yankee monopolies would have an interest in hiding it in order to maintain it as a reserve in case revolutionary governments were established in the countries that currently produce oil. Although the governmental capitalist sector represents the dominant segment of the country's capitalist class, it must be pointed out that the sector of capitalists who call themselves oppositionists are also involved in exploiting the Nicaraguan people. Many times, the governing and opposition groups jointly exploit important sectors of the national economy, as is the case regarding sugar, milk, the press, banking, liquor distilleries, etc. The economic system described above turns the other classes making up Nicaragua's population into victims of exploitation and oppression. The poor diet of the working classes has caused numerous deaths through hunger. It is known that in 1964, hundreds of peasants died of hunger in the Timpisque area in the department of Matagalpa. In various regions in the north, the incidence of goiters is very high. In the Malacaguas area, there have been cases of collective dementia provoked by poor diet, night blindness resulting from vitamin A, and protein deficiencies has occurred in areas around the town of Dario. A few years ago, some tests carried out in a school in Ginotepes a region located near the country's capital, indicated that every one of the 200 students suffered tuberculosis. Only 1.1% of the Nicaraguan population has completed primary school. 50% of the population has had no schooling whatever. The proportion of students that leave school in the first grade or repeat grades is extremely high, 73%. Only 21% of the student population comes from the sector of society with income levels at or below this country's average. Out of 200,000 young people from 14 to 19 years of age, barely 20,000 are enrolled in high school or commercial, vocational, or agricultural education. Infant mortality reaches dreadful levels in Nicaragua. More than 50% of the deaths in the country occur among persons under 14 years of age. Out of every 1,000 children born, 102 die. 6 out of every 10 deaths are caused by infectious, meaning curable, diseases. In recent investigations, 9.28% of the population had a positive reaction in tests for malaria, while in Costa Rica it is 0.96% and in Panama 4.98%. That's really bad. All right. So just pause for a second. So you see, guys, the Somoza dictatorship, just a U.S.-backed dictatorship all around the world, which is pretty much like, 90% of the world, in my opinion. That's what they do. They don't care about people being able to read, getting education. They don't care about immunizations. They want the general population as sick as possible so they can't fight back. So, page 26. Next bullet point. Let me put my phone on mute because my phone really blasts, dude. All right, muting. No. Ringtone is on mute. Sorry about that, guys. All right, next bullet point. Nicaragua, a victim of Yankee aggression for more than a century. Let's read. To understand Nicaragua's current political situation, it's necessary to keep in mind certain characteristics that have been seen throughout its national history. Nicaragua is a country that has suffered foreign aggression and oppression for more than 4 centuries. Together with the other countries of Latin America, Nicaragua faced rule by the Iberian Peninsula. In a region of its territory located on the Atlantic coast, it also suffered Britain domination, which lasted for 150 years until 1893. At the same time, Nicaragua was among the first victims of the aggressive policy of the United States. Shortly after the so-called Monroe Doctrine was proclaimed by the U.S. government in 1823, Nicaragua was chosen as the target of Yankee capacity. In the decade of the 1830s, representatives of the Washington government traveled through Nicaragua in order to obtain info to prepare for intervention in the country. Below is a list of some of the Yankee acts of aggression that Nicaragua has suffered. Okay, pause. Get ready for this, guys. There's like a dozen of these. This is insane. Check this out. All right, continue. 1850, the governments of England and the U.S. signed the so-called Clayton-Bulwer Treaty, by which these powers, without taking the Nicaraguan government into account, arbitrarily decide to divide among themselves the right to build an inter-ocean route through Nicaragua. 1854, in June of that year, a U.S. warship commanded by a seaman named Hollins bombards the Nicaraguan port of San Juan del Norte and reduces it to ashes. 1855. Several thousand North American filibusters headed by William Walker intervene in Nicaragua. Walker proclaims himself president of Nicaragua and is recognized as such by the Yankee government of Franklin Pierce. Among other savage measures, he decrees slavery. The Nicaraguan people, with the backing of other peoples of Central America, take up arms and succeed in throwing out the interventionist. In 1870, the Nicaraguan government's head of foreign relations, Dr. Tomas Ayon, sends patriotic notes to the U.S. government representative in which he protests that government's interference in the internal affairs of Nicaragua and demands reparation for the material damages caused by the bombardment of 1854 and fulfillment of financial commitments made by the millionaire investor Cornelius Vanderbilt. I've heard that name before. 1893, Louis Hankey, representative of the U.S. government, is unsuccessful in his attempt to intervene on behalf of a reactionary group against whom a resolute popular rebellion occurs. 1907, the U.S. government warships occupy the waters of the Gulf of Fonseca. 1909, the nationalist Nicaraguan government shoots 2 North Americans named Cannon and Gross, who were guilty of participating in armed actions against the Nicaraguan government. The U.S. government, through the U.S. Secretary of State, sends a note to the Nicaraguan government known as the Knox Note, in which it openly states that it has the right to intervene in Nicaragua's internal affairs. Sorry, I want to yawn, but I can't. 1910, U.S. warships intervene on the side of the conservatives who are in revolt against the Nicaraguan government. In this way, the U.S. imposes a sellout government on Nicaragua. 1912, the country is occupied by thousands of U.S. Marines. Armed resistance to the occupation lasts for several months, at the end of which the patriotic leader, Benjamin Zeldon, dies with arms in hand. 1914, Emiliano Chamorro, the conservative government's ambassador to the U.S., and U.S. Secretary of State Bryan signed the disgraceful canal treaty known as the Chamorro-Bryan Pact. 1927, Jose Maria Moncada, a representative of the liberal bourgeoisie and military, head of the People's Army that has been fighting the government imposed by the North American intervention, commits a betrayal and enters into agreement with the representative of the State Department, Henry L. Stimson, who years later would become Secretary of War in the Truman government. While Stimson occupied this post, the barbaric atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki took place. That says 1927. Oh, it's just saying later on. Okay. Augusto Cesar Sandino, head of a column of the People's Army, refuses to accept the Moncada Agreement and rises up in arms against the North American occupation and the traitors who support it. The Army for the Defense of National Sovereignty, headed by Sandino, carries out more than 500 clashes with the occupation forces. This makes it impossible for the Yankee occupiers to defeat the Nicaraguan patriots militarily. But before leaving the country at the beginning of 1933, they leave behind them a reactionary force called the National Guard. 1934. On February 21st of that year, Augusto Cesar Sandino is murdered. Rest in peace. Anastasio Somoza G., Commander-in-Chief of the National Guard, orders this crime carried out after receiving instructions from the Yankee ambassador Arthur Bliss Lane. The murder is carried out during the days when Augusto Cesar Sandino and his comrades were preparing to fight against the anti-popular direction in which the country was being led. Having received guarantees that his life would be respected, Sandino decided to take part in talks in order to dispel the slanderous charge that he was not interested in peace. 1936. Somoza ousts the constitutional president of the country with the approval of the U.S. government. 1947. Somoza ousts the constitutional president of the country, again with the approval of the U.S. government. 1960. The U.S. fleet in the Caribbean Sea is mobilized to protect the governments of Guatemala and Nicaragua, which are facing growing popular discontent. Whew. That was a mouthful. Let me get some water. Excuse me. All right, so here goes the next bullet point. Nicaragua, a base for Yankee aggression. Together with plundering its national riches, U.S. imperialism has been using Nicaragua's geographic location position to make it a base for aggression against other Latin American peoples. The Chamorro-Bryan Canal Treaty is still in force, which practically makes the U.S. Nicaragua's master. This treaty authorizes the Washington government to build military bases in Nicaragua and also grants it the right to build an interocean canal through the country. Below is a list of various events showing how Nicaragua serves as a base for imperialist aggression against other Latin American peoples, and especially against the countries around the Caribbean Sea. Oh boy. 1948. With its armed forces, the Somoza government intervenes in Costa Rican territory, where an armed conflict is developing that culminates in the persecution of that country's workers' movement. 1954. The Somoza government supports the Guatemalan mercenaries that launch an attack against the Democratic governor of Jacobo Arbenz. 1955. The Somoza government intervenes militarily in Costa Rica. 1961. The mercenary invasion that is defeated by revolutionary Cuba at the Bay of Pigs leaves from Puerto Cabezas and Nicaragua. 1965. National Guard troops form part of the foreign forces that, led by U.S. Marines, occupy the territory of the Dominican Republic. In the same year, 1965, counter-revolutionary mercenaries captured in Cuba state that they left from training camps in Nicaraguan territory. 1966, René Schick, nominal president of Nicaragua, states while traveling in the U.S. that Nicaraguan territory can be used as a base for forces aimed against Cuba. 1967, Anastasio Somoza Debayle makes known his decision to send members of the National Guard to take part in the aggression in Vietnam. 1968, it has been asserted that Somoza's agents took part in the overthrow of the government of Onofre Arias, who, despite his submissiveness, apparently didn't fully satisfy all the demands of the U.S. government. He was the president of Panama. It says in parentheses or asterisks, it says, deposed by a military coup, but 11 days after his election in October 1968. Damn. Man, my throat hurts. I've only read like 6 pages. Man, speaking takes a lot out of my voice. Sorry. Sorry. This is a very long chapter. Let's try and read a few more bullet points. Let's see how it goes. All right, the next bullet point, guys. A tradition of rebellion. A notable feature of Nicaraguan history, particularly during the stage that began with independence from Spanish rule in 1821, is the use of violence by different political forces within the exploiting classes fighting over control of the government. Peaceful changes between different factions of the ruling classes, which have been rather frequent in other Latin American countries, have not taken place in Nicaragua. This traditional experience predisposed the Nicaraguan people against electoral forces and in favor of armed struggle. There is no doubt, then, that the Nicaraguan people have a rich tradition of rebellion. It is a fact that the Nicaraguan people have taken up arms to fight specific forms of oppression, many times through movements headed by individuals. Movements that in no sense could lead to progressive revolutionary change. This represents another characteristic of the Nicaraguan people throughout their history. This characteristic relates to the lack of a deep-going revolutionary consciousness. The ideological obscurantism inherited from the colonial epoch has continued to weigh heavily in preventing the people from marching with full consciousness towards struggle for social change. It is undisputable that throughout their history, the Nicaraguan people have endured numerous battles in which they have demonstrated their courage, but they have marched to these struggles more by instinct than by through consciousness. Perhaps it is useful to repeat, in the case of Nicaragua, the words that Marx wrote in relation to Spain. Marx pointed out that the Spanish people had traditionally been a rebel people, but not a revolutionary people. The national and international conditions that currently prevail make it possible for at least a sector of the Nicaraguan people to initiate armed struggle, conscious that they are trying not simply to achieve a change of men in power, but a change of the system, the overthrow of the exploiting classes and the victory of the exploited classes. I like that. See, words like that fire me up. Damn, dude, it looks like guys, oh man, what the heck? I just got booted off of TikTok Live, guys. I just got kicked out. They said I was promoting hate speech. TikTok has banned me again. Son of a bitch, bro. It's fucking bullshit. I can't believe this. That's so frustrating, dude. Alright, I'm sorry. Let me continue. Let me just make sure it's still loading on YouTube. Am I still live on YouTube? Yes, I am. Am I still live on Twitch? Let's make sure I'm not getting kicked off here. Alright, it says I'm still live. Okay. Sorry about that. Let's continue. We'll worry about that later. What's wrong with my hat? I need a haircut bad. All right. Next bullet point. Origin and prolongation of the present regime. It is not possible to analyze the conditions that have permitted the ruling clique to remain in power for more than 3 decades without stopping to study the country's situation at the time this regime was installed, as well as a situation that has been developing for more than 30 years. From 1926 to 1936, the Nicaraguan people went through one of the most intense periods in their history. The armed struggle through which the people sought change produced more than 20,000 deaths. The struggle began as a fight against a conservative government imposed by the North Americans, went through the Sandinista resistance, and concluded with Anastasio Somoza's military coup against Juan B. Sacasa. The struggle was carried out without an industrial proletariat existing. The incipient bourgeoisie betrayed the Nicaraguan people and sold out to the Yankee intervention. The bourgeoisie could not be immediately replaced as the vanguard of the people's struggle by a revolutionary proletariat. The Sandinista resistance, which became the heroic vanguard of the people, had an almost totally peasant composition, and therein lies the glory and the tragedy of that revolutionary movement. Very interesting. It was a glory for the Nicaraguan people that the most humble class responded to the stains against the honor of the homeland. And at the same time a tragedy because it involved a peasantry lacking any political level whatsoever. Moreover, there were leaders of important guerrilla columns who were totally illiterate. As a result, once Sandino was assassinated, his movement could not maintain its continuity. The prolonged armed struggle, which ended in betrayal and frustration, exhausted the people's strength. The sector headed by Anastasio Somoza won hegemony over the traditional Liberal Party, while the opposition to Somoza's government came to be dominated by the traditional Conservative Party a reactionary political force profoundly weakened because in the 30s, this party's sellout to the Yankee and interventionist was fresh in people's memory. An important factor that also seriously contributed to the interruption of the anti-imperialist struggle was the situation arising from the outbreak of the Second World War, which concentrated the focus of the world's reactionaries on Europe and Asia. Yankee imperialism, the traditional enemy of the Nicaraguan people, became an ally of the World Anti-Fascist Front. The lack of a revolutionary leadership in Nicaragua prevented this reality from being interpreted correctly, and Somoza took advantage of the situation to consolidate the rule of his clique. All right, let's go with next bullet point. The rise of the old Marxist sector. For many years, the influence of the Marxist sector in the opposition was almost completely under the control of the conservative sector, the political force representing the interests of one sector of the capitalist class. One of the factors that contributed to the weakness of the Marxist sector originated in the conditions in which the Nicaraguan Socialist Party, the traditional communist organization in Nicaragua, was formed. That organization was formed in June 1944, when the Second World War was still not over, and in a period when the views of Earl Browder were in full force. Browder, the General Secretary of the Communist Party in the U.S., proposed conciliation with the capitalist class and with North American imperialism in Latin America. It's an asterisk says from 1930 to 45. I don't think he was a real one. Okay. In those years, the Nicaraguan workers' movement was basically made up of artisans, and this provided a base for anti-working class deviations. In addition, the leadership of the Socialist Party was also of artisan origin and not of proletarian roots of the Nicaraguan Socialist Party. Demagogy asserts. It was a leadership that suffered from an extremely low ideological level. For many years, the revolutionary intellectual was a rare exception in Nicaragua. The radical and free-thinking intellectuals of the years of the U.S. armed intervention, who as a class represented a bourgeoisie that ended up capitulating, could not be replaced by intellectuals identified with the working class for the reasons previously explained. As a result, the intellectual movement in Nicaragua came to be the monopoly of a Catholic element, who for a period even began to openly identify with fascism. In this way, the door of thought remained shut to the revolutionary movement. The Nicaraguan Socialist Party was organized in a meeting whose objective was to proclaim support to Somoza's government. This took place on July 3rd, 1944, in the Managua Gymnasium. To be rigorously objective, it's necessary to explain that this very grave error was not the result of a simple bad faith by the leaders. We must look at the factors that brought it about. The Marxist leadership did not possess the necessary clarity in the face of the conservative sector's control over the anti-Somozaist opposition. It could not distinguish itself. It could not distinguish between the justice of the anti-Somozaist opposition and the maneuvers of the conservative sector. Once Somoza had used the pseudo-Marxist sector for his own benefit, he unleashed repression against the workers' movement, which, due to the comfortable conditions in which it was born, did not know how to defend itself with the necessary revolutionary firmness. Parallel to this, the capitalist sector of the opposition, Conservative Party, liberal opposition grouping, carried out all kinds of compromises with the Somoza regime. Boo! Alright, guys, I've read 10 pages, and we still have, in this chapter, 10 more pages to go. Man, I'm really spent. My throat hurts. And all right, I'm gonna put a bookmark in here real quick. All right, let's pause here for a second. Man, I don't know how folks do it. They do book readings on the regular, every other day, reading dozens of pages. Man, my throat hurts. I'm gonna pause on that one. And I had a double shot espresso right before this, man. But I'm like, oh, so sleepy. I'm so sleepy. Maybe my body's telling me something. Oh, dude, I need a shave. I look kind of ragged, dude. I need a haircut so bad. Let's do this. Let me take a break. Oh my gosh. I really want to read a few games from 50 Key Video Games, and I really want to play some Armored Core 6. I think I need more coffee. I think down the street is the haircut place. I really want a haircut, man. I think I'm going to go do that. Let me, like, freshen up. I look like a mess, dude. I got off work early and was so excited to stream. So, just stay tuned, guys. Let me figure out why I got kicked off of TikTok for this stream. It's frustrating. I shouldn't even stream there anymore. Just for shit posting or something, you know? So, all right, but stay tuned, guys. I'll let you know when I'm streaming later soon.